The homeless woman had been standing outside the cafe for 3 hours, and Marcus Chen was getting tired of watching his customers walk around her. From his corner office on the third floor of the Chen Industries building, he could see everything happening on the street below through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The woman clutched a torn cardboard sign that read, "Hungry, anything helps," in faded blue ink. Her gray hair hung in tangled strands around her weathered face, and her clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus checked his Rolex. His daughter Emma would be arriving any moment for their weekly lunch date, the one sacred hour he carved out of his relentless schedule every Thursday. At 9 years old, Emma was the only person who could pull him away from board meetings and conference calls. But today, she would see that woman on the street, and Marcus knew exactly what would happen next. His daughter had a heart too big for her own good, just like her mother had. The elevator chimed, and Emma burst through his office doors with her usual boundless energy, her school backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Her dark hair was pulled back in 2 neat braids, and her school uniform was somehow still pristine despite it being the end of the day. She carried a white bakery box tied with pink ribbon, holding it like it contained the most precious treasure in the world. "Daddy!" she squealed, rushing to his desk. "I got us the chocolate cake with the strawberries on top, just like Mommy used to make for special occasions." Marcus felt the familiar sting in his chest whenever Emma mentioned her mother. Caroline had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving Marcus to navigate single parenthood while running a multi-million-dollar tech company. He had learned to compartmentalize his grief during business hours, but Emma's innocent references to their past life always caught him off guard. "That sounds perfect, sweetheart," he said, standing to kiss the top of her head. "Should we head down to our usual spot?" Their usual spot was a small table at Rosie's Cafe on the ground floor of his building. It was nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place that served decent sandwiches and coffee. But Emma loved it because the owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, always remembered her name and saved the corner booth by the window. More importantly, it was where Caroline used to take Emma for hot chocolate after school, back when life was simpler and whole. As they walked through the lobby toward the cafe entrance, Marcus tried to position himself between Emma and the window, hoping to block her view of the homeless woman outside. But Emma was too quick and too observant. She pressed her face against the glass door and immediately spotted the figure hunched on the sidewalk. "Daddy, look at that lady," Emma whispered, her voice filled with concern. "She looks so sad and cold." Marcus sighed internally. "Emma, we talked about this. There are social services that help people like that. It's not our responsibility to—" "But she's right outside our building," Emma interrupted, her brow furrowed in the way that meant she was thinking hard about something. "And look, she doesn't even have a coat. It's almost winter." The woman on the street did look particularly frail that day. Her thin jacket was riddled with holes, and she shivered visibly in the October wind. Marcus had seen her around the neighborhood for weeks, but he had trained himself to look past such things. In his world of quarterly reports and shareholder meetings, there was no room for the messy complications of human suffering. He had his own problems to solve, his own daughter to protect and provide for. "Come on, Em," he said gently, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Rodriguez is waiting for us." They settled into their usual booth, and Emma carefully untied the ribbon on the cake box, revealing a beautiful chocolate layer cake topped with fresh strawberries and whipped cream. It was her birthday cake from earlier that week, but she had insisted on saving half of it to share with her father during their lunch date. Marcus marveled at his daughter's selflessness, wondering how someone so young could possess such natural generosity. "Tell me about school today," Marcus said, attempting to redirect her attention as he cut 2 generous slices of cake. Emma launched into an animated story about her art class and how she had painted a picture of their family, including a spot for her mother watching over them from the clouds. But Marcus could see her eyes drifting toward the window every few minutes, clearly unable to stop thinking about the woman outside. "Daddy," she said suddenly, interrupting her own story, "what if that lady is somebody's mommy?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He set down his fork and looked at his daughter's earnest face, seeing Caroline's compassionate nature reflected in her dark eyes. "What do you mean, sweetheart? What if she has kids somewhere who are worried about her? What if she's lost and can't find her way home? Emma's voice grew smaller. When Mommy went to heaven, I kept thinking maybe she was just lost and couldn't find her way back to us. Marcus felt his throat tighten. In the 2 years since Caroline's death, he had focused so intently on maintaining stability and routine for Emma that he had forgotten to address the deeper questions she might be wrestling with. He had assumed that keeping busy and moving forward was the healthiest approach, but perhaps his daughter needed something more. "Emma," he said carefully, "that lady outside, she's probably dealing with problems that are very complicated. Sometimes adults make choices that lead them to difficult places." "But what if she didn't choose it?" Emma persisted. "What if something really bad happened to her, like what happened to Mommy, and now she doesn't have anyone to take care of her?" Before Marcus could respond, Emma had slipped out of the booth and was walking toward the counter where Mrs. Rodriguez was wiping down coffee cups. Marcus watched in amazement as his 9-year-old daughter engaged the cafe owner in serious conversation, gesturing toward the window and then back toward their table. After a few minutes, Emma returned with a to-go container and a cup of hot coffee. "I asked Mrs. Rodriguez to put some soup and a sandwich in here," Emma announced, carefully placing the items in a bag along with a generous slice of her birthday cake. "And I got her some coffee to warm up." Marcus stared at his daughter in disbelief. "Emma, what are you doing?" "I'm sharing my cake," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You always tell me that sharing makes everything better. And it's my birthday cake, so it's extra special. Maybe it will make her feel special too." Before Marcus could stop her, Emma was heading toward the door with a bag of food. He quickly threw money on the table and hurried after her, his mind racing with concerns about safety and propriety. But as he stepped outside, he found Emma already kneeling beside the homeless woman, offering her the bag with a shy smile. "Hi," Emma said softly. "I brought you some food and a piece of my birthday cake. It has strawberries on it." The woman looked up with startled eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Up close, Marcus could see that she was probably in her 60s, with deep lines etched around her eyes and a tremor in her hands. But there was something else in her expression, something that made Marcus take a step closer. "Thank you, little angel," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "You are very kind." Emma beamed at the compliment and sat down cross-legged on the sidewalk beside her, completely oblivious to her father's mortification. "What's your name?" she asked. The woman hesitated for a long moment, glancing up at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "My name is Grace," she said finally. "That's a pretty name." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. "Now, back to the story," Emma said. "My name is Emma, and this is my daddy, Marcus. We live in the building right here. Well, Daddy works here, but we live in a big house across town." Grace's eyes widened slightly when Emma said Marcus's name, and she studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. There was something familiar about her features, something that nagged at the edges of his memory, but he couldn't place it. "Marcus Chen?" Grace asked quietly, and her voice carried a strange tremor. "Yes," Marcus replied, surprised that she knew his full name. "How did you—" "You look just like your father," Grace said, and the words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly beneath his feet. His father had died when Marcus was only 5 years old, and his mother had raised him alone, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. He had very few memories of his father, just fragments of a man who used to carry him on his shoulders and read him bedtime stories. His mother rarely spoke about him, always saying it was too painful to revisit the past. "I'm sorry," Marcus said slowly, "but I think you might have me confused with someone else." Grace reached into her pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She handed it to Emma, who studied it with fascination before passing it to her father. Marcus nearly dropped the picture when he saw it. The photograph showed a young man who looked exactly like Marcus, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and graying hair. The man was wearing a military uniform, and the woman wore a simple dress and a radiant smile. On the back of the photo, in faded blue ink, someone had written, "David and Grace Chen, 1985. "That's your father," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that's me, 38 years ago." Marcus stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "That's impossible," he said. "My father died when I was 5. My mother told me he was killed in a training accident at the army base." Grace's face crumpled, and tears began to stream down her weathered cheeks. "David died, yes. But I didn't. I'm not your father's friend, Marcus. I'm your father's mother. I'm your grandmother." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he sank down onto the sidewalk beside Emma and Grace, his legs suddenly unable to support him. Emma looked back and forth between the two adults, her young mind trying to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "But that would make you my great-grandmother," Emma said slowly, working through the family connections in her head. Grace turned to look at Emma with wonder, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Yes, sweetheart. If Marcus is truly my grandson, then you would be my great-granddaughter." Marcus felt as though he were drowning in confusion and disbelief. "This can't be real," he said, shaking his head. "My mother would have told me if I had other family. She would never have kept something like this from me." Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dirt on her face. "Your mother was protecting you, just like I asked her to," she said quietly. "After David died, I fell apart. I started drinking, couldn't hold a job, lost our apartment. I was in no shape to take care of a 5-year-old boy. I begged your mother to take you somewhere safe and never look back." "But why didn't you get help?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with emotion he didn't know how to process. "Why didn't you try to get better so we could be a family?" "I tried," Grace said, her voice breaking. "For years, I tried. But every time I started to get back on my feet, something would happen. I'd lose another job, or get evicted, or end up in the hospital. The shame was overwhelming. How could I reach out to you when I had nothing to offer? How could I burden you with a grandmother who was homeless and broken?" Emma had been listening to this conversation with the intense focus that children bring to adult mysteries they don't fully understand. But now she spoke up with the clarity that sometimes comes from innocence. "But you're not broken," she said to Grace. "You're just sad and lost. And Daddy is really good at fixing things. He fixes broken computers at work all the time." Marcus looked at his daughter and felt something shift inside his chest. For 2 years, he had been so focused on protecting Emma from pain and uncertainty that he had forgotten to teach her about hope and healing. But here she was, offering compassion to a stranger who claimed to be family, seeing possibility where he saw only problems. "Grace," Marcus said carefully, "if what you're saying is true, I need to understand what happened. I need to know why my mother never told me you were alive." Grace nodded and began to speak, her words coming slowly at first, then gaining momentum as the story poured out of her. She told him about the decades of addiction and homelessness, about the times she had watched him from a distance as he grew up, too ashamed to approach. She spoke about seeing his wedding announcement in the newspaper and feeling proud but heartbroken that she wasn't part of his happiness. She described the pain of learning about Caroline's death through an old friend, and her desperate wish to comfort him but her certainty that he was better off without her. As Grace talked, Marcus found himself studying her face more carefully. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see the resemblance to his father in her bone structure and the shape of her eyes. More surprisingly, he could see hints of Emma in her expressions. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the gentle curve of her smile. "I've been coming to this neighborhood for months," Grace admitted. "I knew you worked in this building. I told myself I just wanted to see you, to make sure you were doing well. But then I saw you with Emma, and I realized you had built the exact life I had always dreamed you would have. Successful, stable, loved. How could I risk destroying that by showing up with my problems?" Emma had been unusually quiet during Grace's story, but now she stood up and walked over to where Grace was sitting. Without hesitation, she wrapped her small arms around the older woman's shoulders and hugged her tightly. "I think you should come home with us," Emma said matter-of-factly. "We have a really big house, and there's a guest room that nobody ever uses. And Daddy makes the best pancakes on Saturday mornings." Marcus felt his heart stop. The practical part of his mind immediately began cataloging all the reasons why that was impossible. Grace was a stranger, regardless of her claims about family. She had been living on the streets for who knows how long. Emma's safety had to be his first priority. He had worked too hard to build their secure, predictable life, to risk it all on the word of a homeless woman with a photograph. But as he looked at Emma's earnest face and Grace's hopeful, terrified expression, Marcus realized he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just his own character, but the kind of man he wanted his daughter to become. He could choose safety and suspicion, or he could choose the kind of radical compassion that Emma was modeling for him. "Emma," he said gently, "it's not that simple. We need to take time to verify Grace's story, to make sure everything she's telling us is true." Grace nodded quickly. "Of course, Marcus, I understand. I wouldn't expect you to just take my word for it. I know how this must look." "But while we're figuring that out," Marcus continued, surprising himself with his words, "Grace shouldn't have to spend another night on the street. There's a hotel across town that caters to extended stays. We could get you a room there, give you time to clean up and rest while we sort through all of this." Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I couldn't ask you to do that. I don't have money to pay you back." "You're not asking," Emma said firmly. "We're offering. That's what families do, right, Daddy?" Marcus nodded, feeling something warm and unfamiliar spreading through his chest. For 2 years, he had been so focused on maintaining control and protecting Emma from any additional loss that he had forgotten the joy that comes from unexpected generosity. Caroline had always been the one to bring home stray cats and volunteer at soup kitchens, while Marcus handled the practical aspects of their life. But maybe it was time for him to learn something from his daughter about the courage required for kindness. Over the next several hours, Marcus found himself in the surreal position of helping a woman who claimed to be his grandmother transition from the streets to a hotel room. He arranged for Grace to stay at the Extended Stay America near the airport, a clean, safe place where she could have her own space while they figured out their next steps. Emma insisted on coming along to help Grace get settled, and Marcus watched in amazement as his daughter took charge of the situation with the confidence of someone twice her age. She helped Grace unpack the few belongings she had carried in a worn backpack, hung up the clean clothes they had purchased at a nearby Target, and showed her how to work the television remote. "This is the food channel," Emma explained seriously. "They show people how to cook really fancy things. And this is the animal channel, where they have shows about puppies and kittens. I think you'll like those." Grace sat on the edge of the hotel bed, looking overwhelmed by the simple luxury of a clean room with a real mattress and a working bathroom. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Marcus. "I know this is all very strange and difficult." "We'll figure it out," Marcus replied, and he was surprised to realize he meant it. "But first, you need to rest and eat real food. Tomorrow, we can start working on getting you the documents you'll need to verify your identity." As they prepared to leave, Emma hugged Grace goodbye and made her promise to eat the leftover birthday cake they had brought. "It's chocolate with strawberries," she reminded her. "And it's made with extra love, because it was my birthday cake." On the drive home, Emma was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Finally, she spoke up. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would be happy that we helped Grace?" Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I think Mommy would be very proud of you, sweetheart. You showed more courage and kindness today than most adults show in a lifetime." "But what if Grace is lying?" Emma asked. "What if she's not really our family?" It was a question Marcus had been wrestling with himself. "Then we'll have helped someone who needed help," he said. "And that's never the wrong thing to do." The next morning, Marcus called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the day. He spent the morning at the county records office, searching through birth certificates and marriage licenses, trying to piece together the puzzle of his family history. What he found both confirmed and complicated Grace's story. There was indeed a record of David Chen's marriage to Grace Morrison in 1984. There was also a record of David's death in 1987, listed as a military training accident, just as Marcus's mother had always told him. But there were also records of Grace's struggles after David's death, multiple arrests for public intoxication, eviction notices, a stint in a county rehabilitation program. Most surprisingly, Marcus found a legal document from 1988 in which Grace had formally relinquished her parental rights to her grandson, Marcus Chen, citing her inability to provide proper care due to addiction and homelessness. The document was signed by both Grace and Marcus's mother, Margaret Chen. Armed with this information, Marcus drove to the nursing home where his mother had lived for the past 3 years, since her diagnosis with early-onset dementia. Margaret was having one of her clearer days, and Marcus found her in the common room working on a jigsaw puzzle. "Marcus, sweetheart," she said with a smile when she saw him. "What a lovely surprise. How's my granddaughter?" "Emma's fine, Mom," Marcus said, pulling up a chair beside her. "I need to ask you about something important. About my father's family." Margaret's hands stilled on the puzzle pieces, and Marcus saw a flicker of fear cross her face. "What about them?" "Mom, I met a woman yesterday who claims to be Dad's mother. She says her name is Grace, and she showed me a photograph of her and Dad together." Margaret was quiet for a long time, her fingers worrying the edge of a puzzle piece. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I wondered if this day would ever come," she said. "I've carried that secret for so long." "So it's true? Grace is really my grandmother?" Margaret nodded slowly. "She is. And she's also the reason I moved us across the country when you were 6. I was terrified she would try to take you back." Marcus felt a surge of anger. "Mom, how could you keep this from me? I had a right to know I had family." "You had a right to safety," Margaret replied firmly, some of her old strength returning to her voice. "Marcus, you don't remember what Grace was like back then. She was so deep in her addiction that she couldn't take care of herself, let alone a child. There were times when she would disappear for weeks, then show up demanding to see you, reeking of alcohol and completely unstable. But you could have told me about her later, when I was older. You could have given me the choice to reach out to her myself." Margaret reached for his hand. "By the time you were old enough to make that choice, we had built a good life together. You were thriving in school, you had friends, you were happy. I was terrified that opening that door would bring chaos back into our lives. Maybe I was wrong, but I was trying to protect you." Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, processing the weight of his mother's revelation. He understood her motivations, but he also felt the profound loss of decades of missed connection. How different might Grace's life have been if she had known that her grandson didn't hate her, that he might have been willing to help her get back on her feet. "Mom, she's been homeless for years. She's been living on the streets, probably thinking we wanted nothing to do with her." Margaret's face crumpled with guilt. "I know. I've thought about that so many times over the years. But Marcus, you have to understand, I was a single mother, trying to raise a child on my own. I couldn't risk your well-being for someone who had already proven she couldn't be trusted." When Marcus returned to the hotel that afternoon, he found Grace sitting in the small lobby, clean and wearing one of the new outfits they had bought the day before. She looked nervous, as if she expected him to arrive with news that would send her back to the streets. "I spoke with my mother," Marcus said, sitting down across from her. "She confirmed your story." Grace exhaled deeply, relief flooding her features. "I was so afraid you wouldn't believe me. I know how impossible it must have seemed." "She also explained why she kept us apart," Marcus continued. "Grace, I need to understand something. If we're going to move forward with any kind of relationship, I need to know that you're truly committed to staying sober and getting your life back together." Grace nodded solemnly. "I've been clean for 8 months now," she said. "I finally got into a program that worked, through a church downtown. But Marcus, I need you to know that I'm not asking you to take care of me. I'm not looking for a handout or a place to live long-term. I just wanted you to know that I exist, that I never stopped loving you or thinking about you." "What if I wanted more than that?" Marcus asked quietly. "What if Emma and I wanted you to be part of our lives?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "That little girl is the most precious thing I've ever seen," she said. "She has your father's kind heart. But Marcus, I come with a lot of baggage, decades of mistakes and bad choices. Are you sure you want to invite that into Emma's life?" Before Marcus could answer, Emma herself came racing through the lobby doors, having convinced Marcus's driver to bring her straight from school to the hotel. She threw herself into Grace's arms with the uninhibited affection that only children can manage. "Did you eat the cake?" Emma demanded. "Did you watch the animal shows? I brought you something." She pulled a carefully folded piece of paper from her backpack and handed it to Grace. It was a drawing of their family tree, complete with stick figures labeled, great-grandma Grace, Daddy, Emma, and Mommy watching from heaven. At the bottom, in Emma's careful handwriting, were the words, "Family is people who love you even when you're lost." Grace stared at the drawing through her tears, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what family could mean. For 2 years, he had been so focused on preserving the memory of their nuclear family that he had forgotten the power of chosen family, of the bonds that can be forged through compassion rather than just blood. That evening, the three of them had dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the hotel. Marcus watched as Emma chattered excitedly about school and her friends, and Grace listened with the rapt attention of someone who had been starved for connection. When Emma excused herself to use the restroom, Grace turned to Marcus with serious eyes. "I need you to know that I understand if this is too much," she said. "If you decide that it's better for Emma to have distance from my situation, I'll respect that. Her well-being has to come first." Marcus considered his words carefully. "Grace, I've spent the last 2 years trying to protect Emma from any possibility of loss or disappointment. But watching her with you, I realize I might have been protecting her from joy and growth as well. She needs to learn that love sometimes means taking risks, that families can be complicated and still be worth fighting for." "And what about you?" Grace asked. "What do you need?" It was a question Marcus hadn't asked himself in years. Since Caroline's death, his needs had seemed irrelevant compared to Emma's. But sitting across from this woman who represented both his past and his future, he found himself acknowledging a loneliness he had been trying to ignore. "I need to learn how to be part of a family again," he said honestly. "I've gotten so good at being self-sufficient that I forgot how to let people in. Maybe we can figure it out together." Over the following weeks, Grace became a regular presence in their lives. She moved into a small studio apartment across town, with help from a social services program that Marcus helped her navigate. She started attending regular AA meetings and working with a counselor to address the trauma and addiction that had derailed her life for so many years. Most importantly, she began building a genuine relationship with Emma, who embraced her great-grandmother with the wholehearted enthusiasm that Marcus remembered from Caroline. Grace taught Emma how to knit and shared stories about Marcus's father that filled in gaps in their family history. In return, Emma helped Grace navigate modern technology and introduced her to the simple pleasures of childhood that Grace had missed with her own son and grandson. The transformation was remarkable on both sides. Grace began to carry herself with more confidence, her posture straightening as she rediscovered her sense of purpose. Emma, meanwhile, seemed to blossom under the attention of someone who had unlimited time to listen to her stories and answer her endless questions about family history. For Marcus, the adjustment was more complicated. His natural instinct was to maintain control and protect his carefully constructed life from chaos. But as he watched Grace and Emma together, he began to understand that some of the most meaningful experiences come from vulnerability and uncertainty. The real test came 6 weeks after their first meeting, when Grace suffered a minor heart episode and ended up in the hospital. Marcus found himself faced with the choice between maintaining his emotional distance or fully stepping into the role of family caregiver. He chose family. Marcus took a leave of absence from work to help coordinate Grace's care, working with doctors and social workers to ensure she had everything she needed for recovery. Emma insisted on visiting every day after school, bringing homework to do in the hospital room and chattering about her day while Grace rested. It was during one of these visits that Marcus realized how profoundly his perspective had shifted. As he watched Emma carefully arrange get-well cards on Grace's bedside table, he saw Caroline's influence in their daughter's compassion. But he also saw something new, a kind of resilience and emotional intelligence that came from learning to love imperfect people in complicated circumstances. "Daddy," Emma said one evening as they drove home from the hospital, "do you think great-grandma Grace is going to be okay?" "I think she's going to be fine," Marcus replied. "Her heart is strong, and she has good reasons to take care of herself now." "Because of us?" "Because of us. And because she's finally learned that she deserves to be taken care of." Emma nodded solemnly. "I'm glad we found her," she said, even though it was scary at first. "Why was it scary?" Marcus asked. "Because I thought maybe you wouldn't want another person to love," Emma said with the brutal honesty of childhood. You seemed so sad after Mommy died, and I thought maybe your heart was too tired." Marcus pulled over to the side of the road and turned to look at his daughter, struck by her insight. "Emma, loving more people doesn't make my heart tired. It makes it stronger. And you taught me that." 3 months later, Grace was well enough to attend Emma's school play, sitting in the front row beside Marcus and cheering enthusiastically as Emma performed a solo dance number. Afterward, as they walked to the car together, Grace slipped her arm through Marcus's. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me the chance to be part of this." "Thank you for taking it," Marcus replied, "for doing the hard work of getting your life back together so you could be the grandmother Emma deserves." That weekend, they celebrated Emma's 10th birthday with a small party in Marcus's backyard. As Emma blew out the candles on her cake, surrounded by friends and family, Marcus felt a completeness he hadn't experienced since Caroline's death. Their family looked different now than it had before, but it was whole in a way that honored both their past and their future. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Emma insisted that Grace help her save a piece of cake for later, just like she had done that first day outside the cafe. As they carefully wrapped the slice in plastic wrap, Emma looked up at Grace with serious eyes. "Great-Grandma Grace, do you ever think about what would have happened if Daddy and I hadn't shared our cake that day?" Grace considered the question thoughtfully. "I think you would have found another way to help someone who needed it," she said. "Because that's who you are, Emma. You have a gift for seeing people who are invisible to everyone else." "But what about you?" Emma persisted. "What would have happened to you?" Grace smiled and pulled Emma close. "I would have kept hoping that someday, somehow, I would find my way back to family. I just never imagined it would happen because of a little girl who believed in sharing birthday cake with strangers." As Marcus watched this exchange, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, he had been a man focused solely on professional success and protecting his daughter from any additional pain. He had built walls around their small family, convinced that safety lay in isolation and control. But Emma's simple act of kindness had opened a door to something richer and more complex. Their family now included someone with a complicated past and an uncertain future. Someone who required patience and forgiveness and daily acts of faith. It was messier than the life Marcus had tried to construct, but it was also more authentic, more connected to the values he wanted to pass on to his daughter. That night, after Grace had returned to her apartment and Emma was tucked safely in bed, Marcus sat in his home office, looking at the framed photograph Grace had given him of his father. For the first time in decades, he could see the family resemblance clearly, not just in their physical features but in their capacity for love and sacrifice. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Jennifer," he said when she answered, "I want to set up a meeting with the board next week. I have a proposal for a new company initiative." "Of course, Mr. Chen. What's the focus of the initiative?" Marcus smiled as he looked out his window toward the city lights, thinking about all the people like Grace who might be struggling in the shadows, invisible to those with the power to help. "Family reunification services," he said. "I want to start a foundation that helps families find each other again, especially in cases where addiction or homelessness has created separation. There are probably thousands of Graces out there, and thousands of people like me who don't even know they're missing." As he hung up the phone and prepared for bed, Marcus felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Emma had taught him that sharing cake with strangers could change everything. Now he wanted to find ways to share that same spirit of radical generosity on a larger scale. The foundation launched 6 months later, with Grace serving as its first client advocate. Her job was to work with families in crisis, helping them navigate the complex systems that could either reunite them or keep them apart forever. It was work that gave meaning to her decades of struggle, transforming her pain into purpose. Emma, now 10 and wise beyond her years, served as the foundation's unofficial mascot and inspiration. She insisted on being present at every major event, reminding the adults around her that families come in all shapes and sizes, and that love is not diminished by complexity. On the first anniversary of their meeting outside the cafe, Marcus, Emma, and Grace returned to their original spot for lunch. Mrs. Rodriguez had prepared a special cake for the occasion, decorated with strawberries and inscribed with the words "Found Family," As they sat in their booth by the window, Emma raised her glass of lemonade in a toast. To Great-Grandma Grace, for being brave enough to ask for help. To Daddy, for being brave enough to say yes. And to Birthday Cake, for bringing families together. They clinked glasses and laughed, and Marcus marveled at the complicated, beautiful life they had built together. Outside the window, the street bustled with busy people hurrying to their destinations, most of them unaware of the small miracles happening around them every day. But Marcus knew now to pay attention to those moments when the universe offers unexpected gifts. He had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply notice the person everyone else walks past, and have the courage to share whatever you have to offer, even if it's just a piece of birthday cake and an open heart. Years passed, and the Chen Family Foundation grew beyond anything Marcus had initially imagined. What started as a small initiative to help families reconnect had evolved into a nationwide network of support services, touching thousands of lives across the country. Grace had become the face of their success stories, speaking at conferences and training sessions about the power of second chances and the importance of seeing beyond surface circumstances. Emma, now 13, had developed into a thoughtful teenager who balanced typical adolescent interests with an unusual commitment to social justice. She served on the Foundation's Youth Advisory Board and had started a program at her school that connected students with elderly community members who had been isolated by circumstances beyond their control. Her friends often joked that she had inherited her father's business acumen and her great-grandmother's heart for the overlooked and forgotten. The transformation in their family dynamics continued to surprise Marcus. Grace had become not just a grandmother figure to Emma, but a trusted advisor to Marcus himself. Her decades of navigating impossible circumstances had given her a practical wisdom that complemented his strategic thinking. When the Foundation faced difficult decisions about resource allocation or program development, Grace's perspective often provided the insight that made the difference between success and failure. One evening in late spring, as they gathered for their weekly family dinner, Grace brought news that would challenge them all in unexpected ways. She had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, the same condition that had claimed Marcus's mother 2 years earlier. The irony was not lost on any of them that just as they had found each other, they were facing the possibility of losing connection once again. "I want to be clear about something," Grace said, her voice steady despite the weight of her announcement. "I'm not telling you this because I need you to take care of me. I'm telling you because I want us to be intentional about the time we have left together. I want Emma to have real memories of me, not just stories about the great-grandmother who disappeared into confusion." Emma, now mature enough to understand the implications of the diagnosis, surprised them both with her response. "Then we need to start recording everything," she said decisively. "All the family stories, all the things you remember about great-grandpa David, all the lessons you've learned. We need to make sure none of it gets lost." Over the following months, their family routine expanded to include regular storytelling sessions where Grace shared memories from her childhood and early marriage, painting a picture of Marcus's father that was richer and more complex than anything he had known before. Emma approached these sessions with the dedication of a historian, taking careful notes and asking follow-up questions that revealed her growing understanding of how family stories connect across generations. Marcus found himself learning not just about his father, but about the broader history of their family's immigration experience and the economic struggles that had shaped Grace's early life. He began to understand that her addiction had not emerged in a vacuum, but was part of a larger pattern of trauma and displacement that had affected their family for generations. The Foundation's work took on new urgency as Grace's condition slowly progressed. They launched a new program focused specifically on supporting families dealing with dementia and memory loss, recognizing that these conditions often created separations that were just as devastating as those caused by addiction or homelessness. Grace worked closely with program developers to ensure that the services would address not just the practical challenges of caregiving, but the emotional complexity of maintaining connection with someone whose memories were fading. Emma's role in the Foundation evolved as well. She began speaking at events about the experience of being a young person in a family touched by memory loss, offering a perspective that resonated with other children and teenagers facing similar challenges. Her presentations were remarkable for their honesty and optimism, acknowledging the pain of watching a loved one's memories fade while celebrating the new forms of connection that could emerge in the present moment. As Grace's symptoms became more pronounced, the family made the difficult decision to have her move into the guest wing of Marcus's house, where she could maintain some independence while having access to support when needed. The transition was challenging for everyone, requiring adjustments to their daily routines and new ways of communicating as Grace's short-term memory became less reliable. But there were also unexpected gifts in this new arrangement. Grace's long-term memories remained vivid, and her presence in the house created opportunities for spontaneous storytelling and connection that might not have happened otherwise. Emma learned to treasure the moments when Grace was fully present and engaged, while also developing patience and compassion for the times when confusion took over. The Foundation's annual gala that year was dedicated to celebrating the power of intergenerational relationships and the importance of preserving family stories. Grace was honored as the keynote speaker, and her presentation about the journey from homelessness to family connection brought the audience to tears. Emma introduced her with a speech about how their great-grandmother had taught her that love is not just about the good times, but about showing up for each other through difficulty and uncertainty. As Marcus watched Grace and Emma on stage together, he reflected on how profoundly his understanding of success had changed over the past few years. The metrics that had once defined his life, quarterly profits, market share, professional recognition, seemed less important now than the relationships he had built and the difference he had made in individual lives. The Foundation's impact continued to grow, but Marcus found his greatest satisfaction in the smaller, more personal victories. The grandfather who was reunited with his estranged daughter after years of separation, the teenager who found stable housing and was able to reconnect with her siblings, the elderly woman who discovered that her son had been searching for her for decades, not knowing if she was alive or dead. Each success story reinforced the lesson that Emma had taught him that first day outside the cafe. That simple acts of kindness and recognition could create ripple effects far beyond what anyone might imagine. The Foundation's work was ultimately about seeing people who had become invisible to society and creating pathways back to connection and belonging. As Grace's condition progressed, there were difficult days when she didn't recognize Marcus or became confused about where she was. But there were also moments of startling clarity when she would share a memory or insight that revealed the depth of her continued engagement with their family's story. Emma learned to navigate these fluctuations with grace, finding ways to connect with her great-grandmother regardless of her mental state on any given day. The experience of caring for Grace while building the Foundation taught the entire family about the complexity of love and the importance of presence over perfection. They learned that meaningful relationships don't require constant understanding or shared reality, but rather a commitment to showing up for each other with patience and acceptance. On Emma's 14th birthday, they celebrated with a small party in their backyard, just as they had for years. Grace's condition had deteriorated significantly, and she often seemed confused about who everyone was. But when Emma brought her a piece of birthday cake, Grace's face lit up with recognition and joy. "Strawberries," she said clearly, pointing to the fruit decorating the cake. Just like the first time. It was one of the last fully coherent moments they would share, but it reminded them all that some connections transcend memory and logic, rooted in something deeper than conscious recognition. Love, they had learned, could persist even when everything else faded away. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.